This presentation will focus on tools for analyzing hydrology as an important factor in evaluating riparian restoration potential, specifically on reservoir deltas in Southern California. This project was conducted in collaboration with river partners. Before we dive into details, I just want to take a second to talk about why we should care about riparian restoration. California has lost about 95% of its naturally vegetated floodplain ecosystems through sand and gravel mining, agriculture, construction of dams, water diversion, and channelization for flood control. And these habitats that we've lost are important for a number of reasons, including the fact that they support 225 species of wildlife. In Southern California specifically, these include 13 species of endangered fish, amphibians, and birds, including the least-bell's vireo, arroyo toad, and three-spined stickleback. When we think about trying to restore habitat to recover these species, we have to recognize that hydrologically, California is a massively altered system. And so in thinking about restoration for the region, we're particularly interested in opportunities for multi-benefit projects where we can make use of the millions of acre-feet of water that are imported annually and take advantage of our water storage infrastructure to create more habitat for wildlife. One particularly promising opportunity for multi-benefit projects is restoration of riparian vegetation on reservoir deltas, meaning the zone where the river inlet enters the main reservoir. These areas are interesting because they do continue to flood, which is an important process that we've lost along many western rivers. Unlike the upland reservoir edge, the delta zone also has some soil properties that are more likely to support riparian restoration. However, there are also some hydrologic challenges to restoration in the reservoir delta zones, which is what we decided to explore for this project. Typically, we think of flood regimes as having 5 components that really shape the vegetation community, which are flood magnitude, duration, frequency, timing, and the rate of change from one extreme to the other. For this project, we asked how each of those components might be altered along reservoir deltas and how that might impact vegetation. To answer these questions, we looked at daily water elevation data from 5 reservoir sites in Southern California. Using the data from these sites, we divided each reservoir delta into 5 zones. We'll focus our attention on the middle 3 zones, which is where the interesting flooding happens. So the zone all the way to the left on the bottom diagram there is never flooded by the reservoir, so to a certain extent the hydrologic challenges that we're discussing here don't apply there. And the zone all the way to the right is always underwater. So we're particularly interested in understanding how flood conditions in those middle 3 zones might affect riparian vegetation establishment. And thinking about those 3 zones for each site and the 5 flood characteristics, we use the water level data from the past 41 years to ask, what proportion of the growing season is each zone typically flooded? How many times per year does it flood and draw down? How many consecutive days is each zone typically flooded? What are probable flood heights that each zone might experience? And lastly, how quickly do water levels draw down? So this is a graph that shows the proportion of the growing season that the zone is underwater. And so if the bar is very high, that means the zone is flooded most of the growing season and vegetation establishment there is most likely limited. Looking at flood magnitude, we get a slightly different set of results. So this is a graph that shows the likelihood of in any given year of reaching a certain flood height. And the take-home message here is that some of the sites and zones that look promising for restoration on the previous slide, when we look at flood magnitude, we see a different sort of hydrologic challenge emerge there. And this is a graph that shows the drawdown rate. So very briefly, if the drawdown rate is higher, the gray bar is higher than the red line, then the plants have a hard time growing roots fast enough to maintain contact with the water. And you could see in that slide that that was true for almost all of the sites. So that was a very quick sample of what each of these analyses tell us individually about each site. In looking at the full scope of results, we thought it would be most helpful to assemble these analyses into a wider framework that could be applied across the region to evaluate the many water storage reservoirs across the state. And so this is what we came up with. The decision points in this framework are fairly conservative to prevent practitioners from prematurely rejecting potential restoration sites. As next steps, we think this framework could very well be refined through aerial imagery analysis, field trials, and more detailed field data collection. We think there's also some work to do to understand how climate change might present the possibility of out-of-record flooding and how that would impact this type of work. And that is the end of my time. So thank you again to River Partners for their support of this project. And if anyone has any questions, they are more than welcome to contact me at ehavstad@riverpartners.org, which is written there on the slide. Thank you very much.